Welcome to Sleepless Exorcism. You didn't just click on a story tonight. You've stepped into a case file that should never have been opened, a case that priests refuse to speak about in public, and that investigators admit still keeps them awake at night. Before we begin, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And where in the world are you watching from? Because the hour you're in matters more than you think. Midnight has a way of bending the edges of stories like this, pulling them closer. The shadows in your room might be the same shadows that once pressed against the walls of a place that no longer exists on any map. You still have time to stop watching, but if you stay, know this. Stories like this don't just fade when they're over. They linger, they follow, and sometimes they choose you. If you ask the elders of São Miguel das Águas, they will not give you details. They'll just call it O Caso do Menino, the boy's case, and change the subject. Even decades later, it hangs over the village like a shadow no one wants to step into. I learned about it from Father Paulo, a retired priest I met while researching rural ministry. His eyes clouded with age, his voice worn thin, yet when the topic came up, he spoke with a weight that stilled the room. There were 29, each one different, each one with its own voice, and not all left. The boy was José Ferreira dos Santos, 13 years old, the second of 5 children in a family that worked the land. Their house was simple, clay walls, a palm thatch roof, chickens wandering the yard. His father, Manuel, grew sugarcane and cassava. His mother, Rosa, sold bread in the market. They were known as good, church-going people. Neighbors remembered José as serious, even shy, but obedient and hard-working. He helped his father in the fields, walked his little brothers to the schoolhouse, and spent afternoons playing marbles under the jacaranda tree. There was nothing remarkable about him until the day his mother heard him shouting at no one. She had been kneading dough when a sharp, desperate cry came from outside. "Cala a boca, cala a boca." Shut up, shut up. When she ran to the doorway, she found José sitting on the dry ground, hands clamped over his ears, eyes wide and unblinking, staring into a corner of empty air. When she asked who he was talking to, he said very plainly, "O mentiroso," the liar. From then on, the voices came more often. At first, there was only the liar, who, according to José, whispered things about neighbors that weren't true. Then came O velho, the old man, who warned him of disasters that never happened. Others followed. Some had names, some only titles: O Morto, the dead one; Maria das Sombras, Maria of the shadows. José spoke about them like they were real people standing beside him. He sometimes tilted his head as if listening, then answered out loud in a tone that didn't sound like his own. One morning, while the family was eating, his cup slipped from his hand, spilling coffee across the table. Before anyone could react, he slammed both palms down and shouted in a voice deeper than his father's, "Ele matou!" He killed. Then he stood and lunged at Manuel with such force that it took 2 people to hold him back. A moment later, he went limp, breathing hard, and whispered an apology as though waking from a bad dream. Some in the village thought it was sickness. Others whispered about encosto, a spirit clinging to him. A few kept their distance entirely. The family took him to the local clinic. He was examined, declared healthy, and sent home. But the voices didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied. In the evenings, Rosa would pass his room and hear him speaking rapidly in what she swore was a language she'd never heard. Sometimes she caught him smiling faintly, as if reacting to a joke no one else could hear. Other times, he would sit in silence for hours, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. One night, a loud scraping woke the family. When Manuel went to see, he found José in the front room, pushing the heavy wooden table across the floor. Asked what he was doing, he answered simply, "To keep them out." By then, the list of voices had grown so long that José had to stop and think before naming them all. And though no one knew it yet, they were only at the beginning, when the first voice had just spoken, and no one believed how many more would come. The morning after the table incident, Rosa went to the parish again. She hadn't told Manuel he believed the matter should be handled quietly, without bringing strangers into family business. But Rosa had seen enough. The way José's voice changed, the strange names, the moments when he seemed not to recognize his own mother. It was no sickness, she understood. She walked the long road into town, skirt dusted with red earth, headscarf pulled low against the sun. The church bell was tolling when she arrived. Inside, the smell of candle wax and wood polish hung in the air. Father Miguel was arranging flowers near the altar. He looked up when he saw her, and the moment she began speaking, he set the vase down and listened. "Father, they are inside him," she said, her voice breaking. "Not one, but many. They speak through him. They say things he cannot know." The priest's brow furrowed. He had heard rumors, fragments of talk from the villagers who came for confession, but hearing it from Rosa was different. Still, the church was cautious in such matters. There were procedures. "I will send someone to observe," he said at last. "Not to judge, not yet. Only to see." 2 days later, a man arrived on foot from the mission in the next district. He introduced himself simply as Brother Alvaro, a young Franciscan in a plain brown habit, carrying nothing but a canvas satchel and a worn copy of the New Testament. He was not an exorcist, he explained, but he had been sent to witness and report to the diocese. The Ferreira family received him politely, though Manuel's stiff posture made it clear he wasn't happy about the visit. "We are good Catholics," he told the brother. "We need prayers, not gossip." Alvaro nodded and asked only to spend the day with José. They began in the yard, under the jacaranda. José was sitting cross-legged, drawing lines in the dust with a stick. He glanced up when Alvaro approached, then looked away again. For the first hour, they spoke about ordinary things: school, chores, the cane harvest. Alvaro made notes in a small leather-bound book. It was mid-morning when the first change came. José's gaze shifted toward the empty chicken coop. His head tilted slightly as if listening. When Alvaro asked what he was hearing, the boy's lips curled into a faint smile. "O Morto is laughing," he said. Alvaro asked who that was. "The one who sleeps under the earth. He says your bones are hollow." There was no laughter in his voice, only a flat, matter-of-fact tone. Then, without warning, he spat into the dust and muttered something in a deep, guttural rhythm. Alvaro didn't recognize the language. That afternoon, Alvaro stayed close, quietly observing. He noticed that José often paused mid-action while drinking water while tying his sandal, as though listening to a voice only he could hear. At one point, he whispered a string of words so quickly it was impossible to separate them. When Alvaro asked what he was saying, José replied, "Counting." "Counting what?" "Us." By sunset, the young friar had seen enough to know this was beyond ordinary illness, but his duty was to record, not to intervene. That night, over a simple meal of rice and beans, he asked Manuel and Rosa to describe when it had all begun. Rosa spoke freely. Manuel kept his eyes on his plate. When Alvaro left the next morning, he promised to write to the parish immediately. Rosa walked with him to the road. "Will they send someone?" she asked. He hesitated. "If they believe me." The days that followed were worse. The voices became bolder, interrupting conversations. José would speak in one tone, then suddenly switch to another, higher or lower, without breaking sentence. Sometimes his mouth barely moved, but the words were still clear. Other times his lips moved silently, and the sound seemed to come from somewhere else in the room. His younger brothers stopped playing near him. The neighbors' children, once frequent visitors, stayed away entirely. Rosa heard mutters in the marketplace, that the family was cursed, that they had invited something into their home. One afternoon, as Rosa was sweeping the front room, she heard a loud crash from the kitchen. She ran in to find the cupboard doors swinging open and plates scattered across the floor. José stood in the middle, breathing hard, his hands trembling. "They were throwing them," he said before she could ask. "Who?" "The ones who hate the light." That night, Manuel locked the kitchen door from the outside. It didn't help. They woke to the sound of something scratching along the walls, not from outside, but from within the house. When Manuel forced José to admit if it was him, the boy smiled in a way Rosa had never seen before. "I told them you would be angry," he said. When Father Miguel received Brother Alvaro's report, he read it twice. The letter was careful, avoiding sensational claims, but the descriptions were unsettling. Sudden, unnatural changes in voice and manner, references to multiple distinct identities, knowledge of private matters. Brother Alvaro had not spoken aloud, periods of muttering in unknown languages. It was enough to justify a formal request for assessment, but the church was slow to act. There were forms, permissions, and above all, a reluctance to declare something spiritual when it might still be explained as sickness. So instead of an exorcist, they sent another observer, Father Estevamo, a seasoned parish priest from a neighboring region, older and more skeptical than Alvaro. When Estevão arrived, the Ferreira family gathered in the main room. José was sitting quietly on a low stool, hands folded in his lap. The priest began with gentle questions about school, about the saints, about the Gospel of Matthew. José answered politely, though his eyes kept flicking to the far corner of the room. Half an hour in, Estevão asked if he could pray with him. As he began the Pai Nosso, José's expression shifted. His shoulders stiffened, his lips twitched. By the time Estevão reached Livrai-nos do mal, deliver us from evil, the boy's voice erupted, not loud, but sharp. You don't even know how many we are. The priest stopped mid-prayer. How many? José smiled. More than you can count, but I know them all. Estevão left that evening, his skepticism shaken. In his own written account to the parish, he noted, "If the boy is acting, he is the most gifted I have seen. But if he is not, then something has taken residence that mocks the holy name." Meanwhile, José's body began to change. He grew pale, almost sallow, despite eating well. His eyes were ringed with dark circles. Rosa noticed his hands often felt cold, even in the midday heat. He began to complain of heavy air in the house and insisted on sleeping with the window open, no matter how many mosquitoes came in. One evening, while Rosa was folding laundry, she heard him speaking in a voice she didn't recognize, not deeper or higher, but entirely different in tone and rhythm. She stepped to the doorway and saw him sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. When she called his name, he opened his eyes, and for a moment, Rosa swore they looked older, sharper, almost like someone else was staring out from behind them. "Don't call me that," he said. "Then who am I speaking to?" "O homem sem nome," the man without a name. By now the village was divided. Some believed it was a spiritual affliction and pressed for the church to intervene. Others said the family should turn to local healers who knew how to deal with spirits without the slow approval of the clergy. A few whispered that the boy had been touched by madness and there was nothing to be done but send him away. Rosa refused all of it. She wanted the church, and only the church. "If this is evil," she told Manuel, "then only God's house can cast it out." When the second letter from the parish arrived, Rosa tore it open with shaking hands. It was brief. "The diocese has authorized a formal investigation. A priest with the proper faculties will come to São Miguel to assess the situation. You must be prepared for him to stay as long as needed." Rosa felt relief, but also dread. If they were sending an exorcist, it meant the church believed. And if the church believed, then the thing inside her son was real. That night, as the oil lamp flickered low, José sat by the window, looking out into the dark. His younger brothers were asleep. Manuel was mending a fishing net. Rosa was shelling beans. Without turning his head, José spoke in a low voice. "He's coming, they all know. The man the church sent did not look like the priests of São Miguel. He arrived in the heat of the afternoon, stepping down from the back of a rattling sugarcane truck, his black cassock dusty from the road. He carried no suitcase, only a leather satchel and a small wooden crucifix hanging from his neck. He introduced himself simply as Father Luis. His voice was calm, even measured, as though he had learned long ago not to let urgency show. When Rosa offered him water, he drank slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "The diocese has asked me to observe your son," he said, "and to pray with him." There was no talk of exorcism, not yet. Even with the authority to perform one, The church demanded proof, undeniable, documented, witnessed by more than the family. Jose was sitting in the shade of the jacaranda when Father Luis first approached him. The boy looked up only briefly, then returned his gaze to the dirt, where he was drawing circles with a stick. The priest sat down beside him without a word. For a long time, they remained like that. Two figures in silence, the breeze moving through the trees' purple blossoms. Finally, Luis spoke. "Your mother tells me you have many visitors." Jose's hand froze mid-circle. He glanced sideways at the priest, his mouth twitching into a faint, humorless smile. "She shouldn't have told you." "Why not?" "Because now they'll speak to you too." Inside the house, Rosa and Manuel kept their voices low. Luis had asked them not to hover, explaining that a child, even one in the grip of something dark, might speak more freely when his parents weren't watching. So they waited, trying not to imagine what was being said under the jacaranda. When the priest finally came in, his face was unreadable. "May I stay here for a few nights?" Manuel hesitated, but Rosa agreed at once. A stranger in the house might bring risk, but she believed the presence of a priest, even without prayers, might offer some protection. That first night, Luis was given a mat on the floor of the front room. He didn't sleep much. From his place in the dim light of the oil lamp, he could hear Jose in the next room. Low murmurs, then sudden bursts of laughter, then silence so complete it felt heavy in the air. At one point, a different sound came, a slow, deliberate tapping. Not on the wall, but on the wooden floor itself. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more, then nothing. The next morning, Luis asked to walk with Jose to the cane fields. As they moved between the tall, rustling stalks, he began to speak of ordinary things, the harvest, the seasons, the river beyond the village. Jose answered politely enough, but his eyes kept flicking over his shoulder, as if following something moving behind them. Without warning, the boy stopped and said in a voice unlike his own, "You should not have come." "Why?" "Because you are one. We are many." Later that day, Luis asked Rosa for paper and a pencil. He began writing down everything Jose said, marking the shifts in tone, the way his posture changed, the small but unmistakable differences in his eyes when a visitor was speaking. The list of names grew: the liar, the old man, Maria of the shadows, the murderer, the man without a name. By the end of the second evening, Luis had counted 14 distinct identities, each with its own manner, vocabulary, and way of looking at him. But there was one more disturbing detail. Jose never referred to himself in the first person anymore. Even when he said something about the boy, he spoke as though talking about someone else entirely. The third night, the air was thick and still. The oil lamp guttered once, then went out, leaving the house in darkness. Rosa lit another, but it lasted only a few minutes before flickering violently and dying. In the silence that followed, they heard it, the sound of footsteps pacing the roof. Manuel grabbed a lantern and went outside. Nothing. The roof was bare. But inside, Jose was sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, smiling faintly. "They don't like the new one," he murmured. "Which one?" Luis asked. The boy's smile widened. "Any of them." The next morning, Luis decided to pray aloud in the front room. Not an exorcism, just the Lord's Prayer, spoken slowly, clearly, while Jose sat on the floor nearby. He had barely reached the second line when the boy suddenly clapped his hands over his ears and shouted, "Too loud! Too loud!" "We are only praying," Luis said. "It's not your voice," the boy hissed. "It's his." Then his eyes rolled upward, and for a moment, only the whites were visible. His body stiffened, his jaw clenched so tightly that Rosa feared he'd break his own teeth. Luis stopped praying and placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. The muscles beneath the skin were rigid as stone. When Jose's eyes returned to normal, he looked exhausted, but also strangely satisfied. "I told them you would stop." By now, Luis was convinced this was not a single presence, nor even 2 or 3. It was a gathering, something layered, competing, speaking over itself through the boy's mouth. That afternoon, while Manuel was outside mending a fence, Luis sat with Rosa at the table. "If this continues," he said quietly, "your son will not last the year. It is already wearing him down." Rosa's hands tightened on the edge of the table. "Then we must begin the prayers, the real ones." "The church requires more," Luis replied. "More witnesses, more proof. Once I send my report, it will take time for approval." Rosa's voice dropped to a whisper. "He doesn't have time." That evening, Luis decided to test the reaction without calling it an exorcism. He asked Jose to sit in the center of the room. The boy complied, his expression calm, almost bored. Luis produced the small wooden crucifix from his satchel and held it up. The change was immediate. Jose's head jerked back, his lips curling into a sneer. A low chuckle escaped him, but it was not the sound of a 13-year-old. "Do you think we fear wood?" the voice asked. Luis said nothing, but kept the crucifix raised. The boy's eyes narrowed. "It is not the wood, it is the hand that holds it, and your hand will tire." That night, the house did not sleep. Rosa woke to the sound of Jose speaking in a rapid, rolling tongue. Not Portuguese, not Latin, but something harsher. Luis sat nearby, listening without interruption, occasionally jotting a note in his book. When the boy finally fell silent, he opened his eyes and said, in his own voice, "They're counting again." "How many now?" Luis asked. Jose smiled faintly. "More than yesterday." The following morning, Luis packed his satchel. Rosa watched him, her face tight with worry. "You're leaving?" "I must report to the diocese," he said. "If they believe my account, they will send me back, not alone, but with the authority to begin the rite." Before he left, he knelt in front of Jose. The boy looked at him with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly, only curious. "You will see me again," Luis said. Jose tilted his head. "We will be waiting, all of us." Luis walked down the red dirt road until the house was out of sight. By the time he reached the edge of the village, the sky was heavy with the promise of rain. He didn't look back. The old rectory stood apart from the village houses, its high stone walls catching the moonlight in a way that made the building seem even more isolated. Inside, the air felt still, almost too still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Father Miguel led Jose into a modest guest room, a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a small table with a crucifix mounted above it. The boy sat on the bed without being told, his thin frame hunched, hands clenched between his knees. His eyes roamed the room as though searching for something only he could see. "You will be safe here tonight," Father Miguel said quietly. Jose's lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't the shy, grateful expression one might expect from a frightened child. "Safe." The voice was his, yet the tone was too knowing, too amused. "He knows we followed him here." Father Miguel didn't answer right away. He'd learned not to challenge these moments too quickly. Doing so often stirred more agitation. He only placed a hand on Jose's shoulder and asked, "Would you like water before bed?" Jose tilted his head, as if the question itself were absurd. "The liar doesn't drink water," he replied, his voice lowering. "He spits it out." That name again, the liar. It had first surfaced in the sacristy during confession, and each time it emerged, it came with a certain cadence, a rhythm as if reciting an introduction. Father Miguel fetched a glass of water anyway, setting it gently on the table. "It is here if you change your mind." That night, Miguel chose not to sleep. He sat in the hallway, the door to Jose's room ajar. At first, all he heard was the quiet rustle of sheets, the faint creak of the bed frame as the boy shifted. But after midnight, the stillness changed. The first sound was a soft tapping, 3 times, then a pause, then 3 again. It seemed to come from the wall behind Jose's bed, though there was nothing but open field beyond that wall. Father Miguel stood and stepped closer to the doorway. "Jose," he called softly. The tapping stopped, and then a voice, not the boy's normal voice, but deeper, almost gravelly, came from inside. "Not your house, priest. Not your rules." Father Miguel entered the room. Jose lay on his back, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The glass of water on the table had spilled onto the floor, though the boy hadn't moved. His lips parted, and a different voice, a young woman's this time, spoke in a hurried whisper. "There are 29, but some do not like to be counted." The priest knelt beside him. "Who are you?" The boy's eyes flicked toward him, but the expression was empty of recognition. "A mother. They drowned me in the river when my child cried." The voice cracked, a sudden sob breaking through. Then just as quickly the tone hardened. "But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about you." Miguel's skin prickled. "About me?" "You prayed for someone last night," the voice continued. "A man you thought was dying, he lived. You're welcome." The priest's throat tightened. He had prayed for a man in the hospital the night before, an elderly parishioner in grave condition. He had told no one, not even the boy's parents. He crossed himself, speaking firmly now. "In the name of Christ, leave this child." Jose suddenly convulsed, his body arching in a way that made the bed legs scrape against the wooden floor. A guttural laugh erupted from him, not the sound of a child at all, but something that carried weight, as though it came from deep in the earth. Then, abruptly, silence. The boy collapsed back onto the mattress, breathing heavily. When morning came, Jose seemed calm. He sat at the small table eating bread and cheese, though his eyes avoided Father Miguel's entirely. "Do you remember last night?" Miguel asked. Jose shrugged. "I had a dream about the river. Someone was calling me, but I didn't want to go." That day, the priest began keeping a journal. Each voice, each detail, each moment would be recorded. He had learned through other cases that the more names an entity gave, the more dangerous the situation often became, especially if the number reached beyond 7. This boy had already mentioned 29. By late afternoon, Miguel decided to test something. While Jose was in the courtyard, he placed a small vial of holy water on the table and left the room. When he returned minutes later, the vial was gone. Jose was still in the courtyard, staring at the church tower. "Where's the water, Jose?" The boy didn't answer, but a faint smile crept across his lips. The thief doesn't like people watching his hands. That night the priest doubled his watch. It wasn't long before he learned that watching wouldn't be enough. The second night at the rectory was colder. Not in the way air grows naturally cool after sunset, but in the way that makes breath visible indoors, and the bones ache as if the marrow itself were touched by frost. Father Miguel lit a small oil heater in Jose's room, yet the temperature refused to rise. He kept his journal open on the desk, the crucifix beside it. Each page from the night before was already smudged where his pen had pressed too hard during the more disturbing moments. He knew the importance of documenting everything, not just for the church authorities who might one day review the case, but for himself, to remember details that the mind might wish to bury. At 9:47 p.m., the first voice came. Jose had been sitting cross-legged on the bed, staring into the corner where the wall met the ceiling. Without warning, his body stiffened and his head turned sharply, as though something had whispered directly into his ear. "One," he said. Miguel set down his pen. "One what?" Jose's lips didn't move again, but a deep male voice filled the room. "One who broke the gate." Miguel wrote quickly. "Entity 1, self-identified as one who broke the gate." Male tone. No further information yet. The boy's posture shifted again. His face seemed smaller somehow, the expression tightening as if to fit a different personality behind it. "Two," this voice said, female, almost gentle. "Two who mourn." The priest felt the hair at the back of his neck rise. This was not random. They were introducing themselves. Over the next 10 minutes it continued. Voices layered one after the other. Some seemed human, others less so. The cadence was methodical. 3, who waits in the hollow. 4, who bites. 5, who wears another's skin. By the time they reached 13, Father Miguel's hand ached from writing. He realized the voices were not in chronological order of arrival. Some hinted they had been with the boy for years, others only since the night of the knocking. When Jose reached 22, He stopped abruptly, his body going slack. Miguel approached. Why stop? The boy's eyes flickered with something close to fear, his own fear, not borrowed from the voices. They said, not all want to be counted. If you write them down, they'll come closer to you. Before Miguel could respond, a different presence surged forward, angrier, faster than the others. He's writing our names, it snarled. The boy's head whipped toward the desk, and in one violent motion, he kicked the chair over and sent the journal to the floor. Miguel retrieved it, holding it firmly to his chest. In the name of Christ, you will leave him. The boy lunged, but it wasn't a clumsy child's movement. It was quick, deliberate, the kind of movement Miguel had seen from grown men in street fights. José's hands gripped the crucifix around the priest's neck, trying to tear it away. Miguel forced him back onto the bed, pressing the cross to the boy's forehead. A sharp, acrid smell like burnt metal filled the room, and José let out a high-pitched scream that didn't sound entirely human. When it was over, the boy collapsed again, trembling. Miguel gave him water, which he drank without protest this time, but the priest noticed a thin red welt where the crucifix had touched his skin. At 3:12 a.m., just as Miguel began to think the night might pass without further incident, the tapping returned, 3 knocks, a pause, 3 again, but now it came from inside the room's wardrobe. José was asleep. Miguel approached the wardrobe slowly, rosary in hand. When he opened the door, there was nothing but a few blankets and the faint scent of damp earth. Then, from behind him, a voice said, quietly, right at his ear, 29. Miguel turned sharply. José was still sleeping. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the boy had no memory of the introductions, the attack, or the voice behind the wardrobe. But the welt on his forehead remained, an undeniable mark of whatever had taken hold of him. Miguel knew now that this was not a case of one demon. This was a host, and they were organized, and they had only counted 29. The morning after the counting, Father Miguel's hand still trembled as he poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. The warmth of it seeped into his palms, but the feeling did nothing to ease the chill that clung to his bones. He had faced difficult cases before, cases where one persistent spirit clung to a grieving person or where some nameless darkness prowled at the edges of a soul, but never this. 29. The number itself wasn't what unsettled him. It was the order, the deliberate introductions, the hierarchy. If there were 29, how many more refused to be counted? The boy sat at the kitchen table, picking absently at a piece of bread, his eyes focused somewhere beyond the peeling wallpaper. José looked fragile this morning, but not exhausted, almost as if something had let him rest on purpose. Miguel cleared his throat. Do you remember anything from last night? José shook his head. No, I slept. The boy was lying. Miguel could see it in the quick dart of his eyes. But pushing him would do no good. Whatever lived inside him might take the lead if it felt cornered. After breakfast, Miguel retreated to his study. He unlocked the bottom drawer of the oak filing cabinet, one that had not been opened in years, and pulled out a stack of leather-bound volumes. These were not parish records. They were the private journals of priests who had served before him, some dating back more than a century. Each was thick with handwritten accounts, yellowed pages, and brittle photographs pressed between sheets. He turned to the earliest record he could find, from 1894. The handwriting was cramped and severe, belonging to a Father Esteban who had served in a remote mountain parish. The first entry was about a young woman who spoke in many tongues and refused to eat blessed bread. But the details that caught Miguel's breath were further down the page. They speak one after the other, in order as though a commander had told them to stand in line. They call themselves by titles rather than names. They resist counting past 30. Miguel's chest tightened. This was not the first time. He flipped forward to 1937, another case, this time in the lowlands. A farm boy, aged 12, infested with a council of spirits, each more cunning than the last. The priest at the time had tried to catalogue them, but after 28, the boy became violent and destroyed every page that had been written. A pattern. Across decades in different regions, the same numbers appeared, 28, 29. rarely 30, never more than that. By noon, Miguel's desk was littered with open books. He sketched a rough table, each case on one side, the number of voices recorded on the other. The notes aligned too neatly to be coincidence. It was nearly 2 in the afternoon when José appeared at the doorway of the study. He was pale, his eyes sunken. "They don't like you reading those," he said. Miguel looked up sharply. "Who told you that?" "They did." The boy's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes didn't match it. "They say the ones before you failed, because they tried to know too much." The priest stood, moving to block the boy's view of the desk. "Knowledge is the only weapon we have." José tilted his head as though listening to something just beyond Miguel's hearing. Then, in a voice not his own, "Weapons can be turned against their owners." Without warning, the oil lamp on the desk flared brighter, then extinguished with a hiss, leaving only the muted daylight filtering through the curtains. Miguel felt an irrational wave of dizziness, like the air had thinned. He gripped the edge of the desk to steady himself. "Go back to your room," he ordered. The boy obeyed, but as he left, Miguel heard a low whisper, not from José's mouth, but from somewhere close to the floorboards. 29 is not the end. That night, Miguel decided to prepare for a formal exorcism. He knew the bishop would not authorize it without extensive evidence, but he also knew that waiting could mean losing the boy entirely. He placed 3 candles around the bed, each blessed. On the nightstand he laid his crucifix, the journal, and a small vial of holy water. At 11:02 p.m., José's breathing changed. His eyes opened, but there was no recognition in them. Miguel began reading from the right, his voice steady. The boy didn't move at first, just stared at him with an unnervingly still expression. Then his lips parted, and a voice said, "Shall we continue counting?" Miguel ignored it, pressing forward with the prayers. 30, the voice said, and the candle nearest the wardrobe went out. The priest's hands shook, but he kept reading. 31, the voice said, and the second candle sputtered, dimming but not dying. Miguel's mind raced. This was not like the pattern in the records. None of the earlier cases had gone beyond 30. 32, the third candle guttered, then extinguished. The boy's mouth curved into a slow, deliberate grin. 33, the voice whispered. From somewhere in the dark, beneath the bed, something laughed. Miguel splashed holy water toward the sound, reciting faster now. The boy convulsed once, twice, then went limp. When the priest checked the candles, he found the wicks had been severed cleanly, as though cut with a blade. By dawn, Miguel understood the danger had shifted. This was no longer a case of containing a known pattern. The counting was not a ritual of identity, it was a summoning, and they were not finished. The day after Father Miguel's second visit began like any other in São Esperança, mist hanging low over the fields, roosters crowing from every direction. Yet for the Ferreira family, the air in their small home felt impossibly heavy. It was as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. José sat at the rough wooden table, his face pale, lips cracked from fever. His mother hovered nearby, pouring weak tea into a chipped mug, though he didn't seem interested in drinking it. The boy's eyes were fixed on a spot just above the doorframe, unblinking. "José," Maria said softly, following his gaze. "What are you looking at?" He didn't answer at first, only tilted his head as though listening to something far away. Then, in a voice that was not his own, a man's deep, gravelly tone emerged. "She will not understand. She cannot see him." The words made Maria's skin prickle. The voice vanished as quickly as it came. José blinked and looked at her again, his own voice returning, flat and tired. "I'm just tired, man." Maria wanted to believe him, but the voices had been growing stranger, more distinct. It was no longer one vague presence. Each seemed to have a different tone, a different mood, as though there were an entire gathering inside her son. Father Miguel arrived just before noon, his cassock dusted from the road. He carried with him a small satchel, not the formal tools of exorcism yet, but what he called items of discernment: a vial of holy water, a small wooden crucifix, a prayer card worn soft from years of use, and a worn Portuguese Bible. He sat with José in the cramped front room, Maria and João standing nearby. The priest began by asking simple questions. "What is your name?" "José Ferreira," the boy replied quickly. "How old are you?" 13. "Do you believe in God?" "Yes." For a moment it seemed almost ordinary, until Father Miguel leaned forward and asked, "And who is with you right now?" José's head jerked slightly, his lips parting in a slow, deliberate smile. The reply came in a woman's voice, high-pitched and mocking. "Many are with him. Many have been here longer than you think." Maria's breath caught. Father Miguel's expression did not change, though his right hand slid subtly to rest over the crucifix in his lap. "And what is your name?" he asked. The voice replied without hesitation. "They call me a mentira," the liar. The priest's notes later recorded that over the next hour, 5 other distinct voices spoke through José, each claiming a name: O assassino, the murderer; O orgulloso, the proud one; a chama, the flame; O riso, the laugh; and a foam, the hunger. Some spoke in accented Portuguese, others in crude, broken sentences, as though grasping at a language not their own. Each time José's body changed subtly, a shift in posture, a change in breathing, a twitch in the corner of his mouth. It was not theatrical or exaggerated, but chillingly precise. Father Miguel did not attempt to cast them out yet. Instead, he prayed quietly under his breath, observing. His training had taught him that rushing into an exorcism without understanding the nature of the presence could be dangerous, even fatal. That night, the Ferreira home was filled with whispers. Maria claimed she heard them while she cooked, voices that came from corners where no one stood. João, though skeptical, admitted to hearing scratching from beneath the floorboards. At around midnight, José began to scream. It was not a single cry, but a layered one, multiple tones at once, high and low, as if several throats were screaming inside one body. When his parents reached his room, they found him thrashing in bed, eyes wide, pupils dilated so far that no brown was visible. His fingernails clawed at the air, as if trying to grab something unseen. João held him down while Maria shouted for help. But there was no one to call. The nearest doctor was in the next town, and the only man they trusted to face whatever this was had already warned them he could not yet stay the night. By the time dawn came, José lay exhausted, breathing shallowly. His pillow was damp from sweat and his lips were bloodied where he had bitten them. When Father Miguel returned that morning and heard what had happened, his face hardened. "This will not stop on its own," he said, "but I cannot begin the rite without the bishop's consent." "Then get it," João said sharply. The priest hesitated. "He will ask for proof. What happened last night? If he were here to see it—" Maria interrupted, her voice trembling. "If you wait too long, Father, you will not be speaking to my son at all." That evening, Father Miguel began to collect evidence, not for himself, but for the church. He asked permission to bring a witness, someone the bishop trusted. The Ferreiras reluctantly agreed. The witness arrived 2 days later, Sister Helena, a small, wiry nun in her 50s, known in the region for her work with the sick and dying. She had seen death often enough to know its smell, but when she stepped into José's room, she later told the priest, the air felt wrong, not heavy, not cold, just wrong. She stayed only an hour, but in that time José spoke in 3 more voices. One, calling itself O Luco, the madman, laughed constantly even when not speaking. Another, a door, the pain, whispered about things the boy could not have known. Old village scandals, secrets buried decades before his birth. Sister Helena left with her face pale, clutching her rosary so tightly it left marks on her fingers. That night, Father Miguel sent a letter to the bishop. It was brief, factual, and stripped of all unnecessary detail. The manifestations are numerous and distinct. This is not a single presence but a host. I recommend immediate approval for the solemn rite, as delay may endanger the boy's life and the safety of those around him. The reply would not come for days, and in those days Jose would not be. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. By then the Ferreira household had grown used to the smell of wet earth creeping through the wooden boards of the floor, the constant drip of water into tin basins they had set beneath the roof leaks. But on that evening, the sound of rain became secondary. There was another noise, faint, almost a vibration rather than a voice, coming from above the main room. It was João, José's younger brother, who first noticed it. He had been tasked with bringing firewood from the back porch. He paused on the threshold and tilted his head toward the rafters. "Pai, there's someone up there," he said. Maria, already pale from weeks of sleeplessness, froze mid-step. Her eyes darted to Manuel, her husband, whose own gaze had drifted toward the ceiling beams. The roof space above the main room was nothing more than an open crawl area where they stored sacks of beans and bundles of dried corn husks. No one should have been there. José, sitting slumped in a wooden chair by the window, lifted his head slowly. His eyes looked dull, almost fevered. "Not someone," he murmured, his lips curling faintly. "Something." The voice that came out was not his own. It had a rasp to it, the kind that made the skin on the back of Maria's neck prickle. Manuel's jaw tightened. He grabbed the old ladder from against the wall and began to climb. Halfway up, the whispering stopped. The only sounds were the rain and Manuel's own breathing. He reached the top, poked his head into the dark loft, and swept his lantern beam across the space. Nothing, only the sacks of food and dust. When he climbed back down, José was smiling faintly at him as if amused. That night, the whispering returned, louder this time, enough that even Maria heard it as she tried to lull herself into sleep. The words were indistinct, but they seemed to circle, moving from one rafter to the next. And once, just before dawn, she could swear the whisper came from directly beside her bed, though no one was there. The parish priest, Father Augusto, returned to the house the following day, drenched from the long walk through muddy roads. His face looked more tired than before, and when he saw José, he took a deep breath, as though bracing himself. "How many now?" he asked quietly. José looked at him with eyes that were not blank, but brimming with a kind of slow, knowing malice. "9, he said simply. "9? Maria asked, bewildered. "9 who speak," José clarified, his voice deeper than his age should allow. "But there are others who do not speak." Father Augusto glanced at Manuel, his mouth tightening into a thin line. "We need to speak privately," he said, and the 3 adults stepped into the small kitchen. In hushed tones, the priest explained that during his absence, he had sent word to the diocese seeking formal permission to perform an exorcism. But approval was slow, especially for a boy so young. There were protocols, psychological evaluations, medical opinions. The church feared making a public spectacle or being accused of superstition. "I've seen cases like this," Augusto said, his eyes grim. "The voices will not stay content with whispers. They will wear down his body first, then the mind will follow. If we wait too long—" He trailed off, unwilling to finish. From the main room, a sudden thump made all 3 of them freeze. When they returned, José was standing on the table, balanced with unnatural ease. His arms were outstretched, and he was muttering something in a language none of them recognized. The wood beneath his bare feet creaked, but his body did not tremble. When Manuel moved toward him, José's head snapped to the side with alarming speed, and his lips peeled back into a grin. "He doesn't like you here," he said, but this time the words were in perfect Portuguese, the voice deep and mocking. "Who?" Manuel demanded, though he already knew the answer. José tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "The one in the rafters." That night, the Ferreira family made the decision to move José's bed into the main room so they could watch him. The constant whispering from the loft made it difficult to rest, but none of them dared move to another house or stay with neighbors. They feared what might happen to him if left alone. At some point past midnight, Maria, half dozing in a chair, awoke to the sound of scratching overhead. She turned her head just in time to see José sit up in bed, his eyes wide open. He stared at the ceiling beams as though watching something crawl along them. "It's coming down," he whispered, his voice his own again. Before Maria could wake Manuel, the lantern by José's bed sputtered and went out. In the darkness, something heavy landed on the wooden floor with a sound that shook the boards. She reached blindly for José, but he wasn't in the bed anymore. When Manuel finally lit another lamp, José was standing by the front door, his back to them. He didn't move until Manuel called his name a third time. Then, slowly, he turned his head, his face pale and expressionless. "It says the Ninth wants to meet you," he told them. By morning, Manuel could no longer hide his fear. He told Father Augusto everything and begged him to act without the bishop's formal approval. The priest hesitated, torn between obedience to the church and the growing danger to the boy. "I will begin the preparations," he said finally. "But I warn you, if I am wrong, if this is something else entirely, it will not be easy to undo what we begin." Maria, her hands trembling as she ladled soup into bowls, said only, "We passed easy weeks ago, Father." That evening, as the rain finally slowed to a drizzle, the family heard the first knock at their door in weeks. A man in a dark coat introduced himself as Dr. Alvarenga, sent by the diocese to conduct an evaluation. He carried a leather case and a clipboard, and his manner was brisk but polite. He spoke to José privately at first, asking questions about his health, his sleep, his appetite, but when José began listing the names of the voices, the liar, the murderer, the child who cries, the blind one, Alvarenga's composure faltered. He tried to dismiss it as vivid imagination, perhaps even a neurological disorder, but the way José described each one, with precise details of their tone, their scent, their temperament, made it difficult to wave away as fantasy. When the doctor left hours later, he looked paler than when he had arrived. "I cannot give you a diagnosis," he told the priest quietly. "But whatever this is, it is not entirely in his mind." That night, the whispering in the rafters returned, joined by a sound like nails dragging along the wood. José, lying in bed, smiled faintly. "The Ninth says you will believe soon," he murmured, just before the lantern went out again. Father Duarte's handwriting had grown tighter, more angular in the margins of his notes, as though each session with José squeezed another ounce of strength from his hands. The leather-bound journal he kept was now filled with smudged ink, where his trembling fingers dragged across wet lines. By the time we entered that dim, close-smelling room again, the boy had not slept for 2 nights. His eyes were ringed with a deep, bruised purple, the kind that looked almost painted on, and the skin along his collarbone seemed looser, his frame having shed more weight. He lay on the cot, not bound this time, but still, there was an unmistakable tension in the air, as if we were all waiting for something to snap. And it did. It began with the sound, not a voice, not at first. A slow, deliberate tapping from under the cot. 3 times. Then silence. Then again. 3 measured knocks. The priest froze mid-prayer, looking down toward the floorboards. I thought it might be a trick of the house settling, but the sound had a precision to it. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. José's lips curled, not in a smile, in something smaller, more deliberate, like he'd just recognized an old friend in a crowd. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer the guttural growl we'd grown accustomed to. It was softer now, almost polite. "Posso entrar? May I come in?" Father Duarte set his jaw. "We are in God's house. You cannot enter here." José laughed once, not the boy's laugh, a dry, papery sound, like it came from deep in the walls. "You've been speaking to liars, to thieves, to the restless, but I am not like them." The priest opened his Bible, but the pages rattled slightly as he held it. "Identify yourself." The voice in José's mouth was patient. "You'll call me Ovidia, the Watcher. I am the 21st. It was the first time any of them had ever announced a number. Until then, we had been counting only by behavior and change in tone, not by any admission from the things themselves. But this one wanted to be numbered. I wrote it in my notes exactly as he said it, Ovidia, the Watcher. "Why are you here?" the priest demanded. "To remember," the voice replied. and to make sure he remembers. Remembers what? There was a pause. José's pupils expanded until the brown of his eyes was nearly gone. The others came for his body, the voice continued. But I came for the place. I have been standing at the gate for a very, very long time. The room grew noticeably colder. I saw Father Duarte glance at the wooden crucifix hanging above the window, and I swear it tilted slightly, not as if it were falling, but as if something unseen had brushed it. Duarte switched to Latin, pressing forward with the right. At the third repetition of Abrenuntio tibi Satana, José's head turned toward the wall and stayed there, as if something in that direction had caught his attention. I followed his gaze. The wall was plain, just the uneven plaster of the old house. But José began to smile wider, until his lips split slightly at the corners. And then, as clear as a whisper right beside my ear, I heard a voice that wasn't the boy's and wasn't the priest's. "We're not alone in here." I nearly dropped my notebook. The tapping under the cot started again, this time faster, irregular, agitated. José began speaking rapidly in Portuguese, the words coming in a rush I could barely follow. They're coming, they're... Then his body went rigid, his back arching so sharply the cot legs scraped against the floor. Father Duarte pressed the crucifix to the boy's chest, but José screamed, not in pain but in laughter, high and thin. It lasted 27 seconds. I counted, and then silence. When the boy's eyes rolled back into place, the watcher was gone. But the boy did not return either. Instead, a different voice, hoarse and low, muttered, "You should not have let him speak." We did not know who him referred to. We closed the session early. Outside, as dusk fell over the village, I asked Duarte if he had ever heard of the watcher in other cases. He shook his head, but his lips pressed into a hard line. That night I lay in my small room at the back of the rectory, unable to sleep. And just as I began to drift off, I heard it again. 3 slow taps from the floor beneath my bed. I did not look. I lay completely still, my eyes locked on the darkened ceiling, the weight of the night pressing against me. The rectory was silent, except for the faint hum of insects outside the shuttered window. Tap, tap, tap. Exactly the same rhythm I'd heard beneath José's cot. For a moment, I told myself it was the wood expanding in the night air, the old floor settling under its own weight. But deep down, I knew the sound was too measured. The mattress seemed to grow heavier, as though the air itself had thickened. I tried to move my hand toward the lamp, but my body refused to obey. A prickling sensation crept from my toes up to my chest, the paralyzing kind of fear that makes you forget to breathe. The tapping stopped, and then, so faintly I almost thought it was in my head, a whisper came from directly below me. "I can stand here forever." I forced my muscles to move and rolled onto my side, breaking the paralysis. My hand fumbled for the lamp switch, and the moment the light flickered on, the feeling vanished. The floor was empty. I didn't sleep again until dawn. The next morning, the priest looked as though he hadn't rested either. His eyes were red, his posture rigid. I didn't mention what I'd heard. Something in me feared speaking it aloud would grant it permanence. We returned to the boy's room. The smell of stale sweat and damp wood had thickened since the previous day. José sat upright this time, his knees drawn to his chest, rocking slightly. He didn't look at us when we entered. Father Duarte began softly, in Portuguese. "You know who I am." The boy's voice, his own voice, answered, "I know." The priest nodded, flipping open the Bible. "Then you know why we are here." José's eyes finally met his. "He came to you last night, didn't he?" The priest hesitated, the smallest flicker in his expression. That was all the confirmation I needed. "Did you see him?" Duarte asked. The boy shook his head. "You don't see him. You notice him. He's been watching for years, even when there was nothing to watch." The temperature dropped again, not suddenly but with an oppressive slowness, as if every degree stolen from the air fed something unseen. The priest began the prayers in Latin. By the second paragraph, José's eyes rolled upward, the whites showing, and the voice Wakwu returned. "Do you think I fear your words, priest?" The watcher's tone was calm, almost conversational. They've been said to me before. They didn't work then either. Father Duarte pressed forward, his voice louder, steadier. But as he reached the invocation of the saints, Jose's head turned toward me, not toward the priest me, and the smile crept back. "You heard me," the watcher said. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You heard me and you listened." The Bible in Duarte's hand trembled slightly. "Leave him," he commanded. "I'm not in him," the watcher said. "Not the way you think." And then, without warning, Jose's body relaxed completely, his head slumping forward. The room fell utterly silent. But I knew it wasn't over, because in that silence, beneath the wooden boards under my own chair, I felt it again. Tap, tap, tap. The sessions continued each afternoon, but by now I had stopped thinking of them as Jose's exorcism. The watcher had shifted his attention, and I felt it with every passing day. That morning, the boy's mother handed me a chipped mug of coffee. Her hands trembled so badly that the liquid spilled over the rim. "He's quieter," she whispered, as if afraid to speak too loud. "But the quiet is worse." I knew what she meant. When we stepped into Jose's room, the air felt heavier than the last time, almost metallic. The shutters were closed, but light leaked through the cracks in dusty beams. The boy sat cross-legged on his bed, head tilted slightly upward, eyes closed. He looked peaceful, and yet I couldn't take a single step closer without my chest tightening. Father Duarte began the prayers in Latin immediately, wasting no time. He had changed something in his voice, louder, clipped, like a man speaking not to convince, but to overwhelm. It didn't work. Jose's lips moved slowly, silently, until the priest reached "Et ne nos inducas in tentationem." "Lead us not into temptation." That's when the voice emerged. But it didn't come from Jose's mouth. It came from behind me. "You've been thinking about last night." I spun, heart hammering, but there was nothing there except the old door, shut tight. Duarte didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on the boy, continuing the prayers. "You left your lamp on," the voice continued, "as if light would help you." I tried to steady my breathing, but my ears picked up something faint beneath the priest's words, the sound of nails dragging across wood. It was coming from inside the wall at my back. "Your wall is thinner than you think," the watcher said, the tone almost amused. "I can already see your bed from here." I wanted to step forward, closer to Duarte, but my legs rooted themselves. Jose's head turned slightly in my direction, eyes still closed. "He's not here for me," the boy whispered, in his own voice. "You know that now." The session ended in failure. The prayers had no visible effect. Duarte was pale, wiping sweat from his brow. The boy's mother sobbed quietly in the hall. That night, back in the rectory, I sat at my desk, notebook open, trying to write my observations. Every few minutes, I glanced at the lamp. I wasn't going to turn it off. Around midnight, the tapping began again. Tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to stand, my bare feet touching the cold floor. The sound wasn't coming from below the bed this time. It was from the wardrobe across the room. As I stared at its dark outline, the tapping stopped. The door creaked open an inch, and in the blackness beyond, I saw what I'd never been able to before. Two faint, glistening reflections, as though a pair of eyes were watching me from deep inside. The wardrobe door hung slightly ajar, its shadow spilling across the floor like a stain that wouldn't dry. The eyes were gone. Or maybe they hadn't been there at all. I stood frozen for what must have been a full minute, my breath coming in shallow pulls. When I finally stepped forward, my toes brushed the edge of the shadow. The wooden boards beneath me were cool, unyielding. I pushed the door open. The faint smell of cedar and mothballs hit first, followed by the quiet rustle of an old cassock hanging from a warped hanger. My eyes scanned the dark space, adjusting. Nothing but clothing, a pair of battered shoes, and a folded blanket on the top shelf. I leaned in anyway, my ear brushing against the fabric. No breath, no heartbeat, just the distant tick of the rectory's clock. Still, I shut the door slowly and locked it. It was nearly 2 in the morning when I found myself outside Father Duarte's room, hand raised to knock. His door was shut, the light beneath it flickering faintly. When he opened it, he looked less like the defiant exorcist I had first met, and more like a man stripped down to his human fear. His hair was unkempt, his eyes shadowed. He didn't ask why I was there. He simply stepped aside, and I entered. On the desk near his bed was a glass of untouched water, a Bible open to the Gospel of Mark, and a single unlit candle. I told him about the wardrobe, about the tapping, about the voice. He didn't interrupt, but the longer I spoke, the more rigid his posture became. Finally, when I mentioned the eyes, he reached for the candle and lit it. "You weren't supposed to see them yet," he murmured. I blinked. "Yet?" Duarte leaned back in his chair, the flame casting deep lines across his face. "The boy is a vessel," he said quietly, "but not the only one. You've been close to him too often, listening, watching. You've given it your attention." "It?" I asked. "The one behind the others, the one that doesn't need a name. The priests who taught me called it the Watcher, but I suspect that's only because they didn't dare call it what it truly was." I felt my mouth go dry. "And it's in my room now?" "Not in your room," he said. "In the walls. The walls remember. They keep voices, footsteps, even thoughts, if it wills them to." The candle flickered, and in the silence that followed I realized we could hear it, faint scratching, like something moving inside the plaster. It was steady, deliberate, circling the perimeter of the room. Duarte didn't flinch. "You need to decide," he said. "Either you keep writing your observations from a distance, or you accept that it will see you as part of the ritual. And if I choose distance, you might get to leave with your mind intact," he said simply. "Or it might follow you. It has done so before." I thought of the boy's whisper. "He's not here for me." "I'm staying," I heard myself say. Duarte studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you'll need protection. And the truth." He told me things that the church didn't put in its official reports. The case wasn't the first of its kind in this village. In the 1920s, there had been another possession, a young woman named Amalia who spoke in multiple voices, each claiming to be a different sin made flesh. Her exorcism had lasted 20 days, but on the 21st morning, she was found hanging in the barn. Her priest swore to his dying day that the voice he heard whispering in the barn rafters wasn't hers. "They buried her in the chapel graveyard," Duarte said. "But after that, strange tapping started in the walls. The church closed the rectory for 10 years. "And you believe," I said slowly, "that what was in her is now in Jose?" Duarte's expression darkened. "No. I believe what was in her is still here. Jose is just a doorway it can push open." The scratching stopped. The candle went still. Then, 3 slow knocks on the wall behind Duarte's chair. He ignored them. "We start tomorrow," he said, "and you will not leave the room until I tell you to, no matter what you hear." The next day, the exorcism resumed. The boy was restrained again, this time not to the bed but to an upright wooden chair in the center of the room. It was positioned so that his back faced the far wall, the one with the deep cracks in the plaster. I sat in a corner with my notebook, my pulse quickening with each word Duarte spoke in Latin. Jose's eyes were half-lidded, darting between us as though sizing up prey. After 15 minutes his breathing changed, shallow, quick. His lips curled into a smile I'd never seen before, teeth barely showing. "You left your wardrobe unlocked," the voice said. It wasn't his voice. Duarte's prayer grew louder, but the words seemed to bounce unnaturally off the walls, bending back toward him. I could hear faint laughter under the Latin, like it was amused by the repetition. Jose's head twisted sharply toward me, shoulders jerking against the ropes. "You shouldn't have told him," it said. "Now he'll watch you when you sleep." A low creak groaned through the cracked wall behind him. The boy's head snapped back violently, his chair scraping the floor an inch. The sound of something moving inside the wall grew louder, dragging, pulling, pushing against the wooden beams. Duarte stepped forward, pressing his palm against the boy's forehead, chanting faster. The air turned cold enough that my breath fogged. That's when the plaster began to bulge. It didn't break. It swelled outward, like something pressing from the inside. A perfect, slow-moving shape, round at first, then narrowing until it resembled the outline of a human face. No eyes, no mouth, just the imprint of a head. Jose began to scream. Not words, just a raw animal sound that rattled my spine. The bulge receded instantly, as though pulled back into the wall. When the session ended, Duarte told me not to write about what I saw. I wrote it down anyway. That night I dreamed of the wardrobe again, but this time when I opened it, the cassock was gone, the shoes missing, the blanket gone from the top shelf. Only a small hole remained in the back panel, just large enough for something to watch through. I woke to the sound of breathing that wasn't mine. The chapel smelled of melted wax and damp stone. Father Almeida had insisted on moving Jose here for the next stage of the exorcism, away from the distractions of the house. The small building sat on the edge of the village, its walls thick enough to swallow the wind, its air heavy with the scent of incense from years of prayer. A wooden crucifix loomed over the altar, lit only by the trembling light of 4 thick candles. Jose lay strapped to the narrow cot they had carried in earlier. His wrists and ankles were bound with coarse rope. His chest rose and fell in quick, uneven breaths. For the first time since this ordeal began, his parents were not in the room. Father Almeida had convinced them to rest in the adjoining vestry. The boy's eyes were closed, but his lips moved, murmuring something too faint to catch. The priest adjusted the collar of his cassock, glanced toward the 2 assistants, local men from the parish who had agreed to help, and then began in a low voice. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. The words seemed to stir the air. Jose's lips froze mid-whisper. A few heartbeats later, his eyes snapped open. The first voice was that of a young woman, soft, almost gentle. "Why do you trouble me, Father?" she asked. Almeida's jaw tightened. "Name yourself." The boy's face twitched. The voice deepened without a pause. "I am the one who makes him doubt. I am the seed of confusion." The priest recognized the pattern now. Every time one spirit was confronted, another emerged, sliding into the conversation like an uninvited guest. He pressed the crucifix to Jose's forehead. "You have no claim here. In the name of Christ, depart." The boy screamed, not in pain, but in a way that felt calculated, almost mocking. The scream turned into a laugh, then into another voice, older, guttural. "I am the murderer. I enjoy his body. It remembers fear." One of the assistants, Paulo, flinched. The other, Manuel, whispered a prayer under his breath. The candle nearest to the cot flickered violently. Almeida continued, louder now, reading from the ritual. Jose thrashed, the rope straining under the sudden violence of his movements. Then the voices began overlapping, not one at a time, but several at once, each competing to be heard. A woman's sob, a man's mocking laughter, a child's wail, a hiss in some foreign tongue, layer upon layer, until it became a deafening chorus. The sound didn't come only from Jose's mouth. It seemed to swell in the room itself, bouncing off the stone walls. Paulo staggered back, clutching his ears. "It's coming from everywhere," he muttered. The priest shouted over the noise, reciting the commands in Latin. His voice was steady, but sweat slid down his temple. The overlapping cries reached a pitch so high it was almost beyond hearing. And then, just as suddenly, silence. Jose's head lolled to one side. His breathing slowed. The priest leaned in cautiously. "Who remains?" The boy's lips curved into the faintest smile. The voice that came was low and measured. "I remain. The others fear me." Almeida felt a chill spread through his chest. This was new. Until now the spirits had fought for dominance, interrupting one another, snarling insults. But this one, it was calm. "You will leave," the priest said firmly. A pause. Then, "No, Father. You will." The candle flames wavered, though no draught stirred. A dull knock echoed. The air inside the parish's side room felt heavier than the night outside. Father Miguel stood at the foot of José's bed, his cassock wrinkled and his hair damp with sweat. He had been called again at dawn by a frantic Juan Ferreira, who claimed the boy had not slept for 2 days and was speaking to the shadows in the corners. The candle on the small wooden table guttered each time José exhaled. He was lying on his side, eyes open, not blinking, lips moving soundlessly. His thin fingers tapped the blanket in a rhythmic pattern, as if keeping time to a song only he could hear. "José," Father Miguel said softly, stepping closer. The boy's lips stopped moving. His gaze slid from the wall to the priest's face, but there was no recognition, just an unbroken stare that felt like it belonged to someone older, colder. "I told them not to call you again." The voice that emerged was low, deliberate. "He doesn't need you. None of us do." The priest swallowed hard. "Who are you?" "Number 9, the voice replied without hesitation. "The one who waits." João, who stood just inside the doorway, gripped the frame tightly. "Number 9, he muttered, his voice almost inaudible. The priest kept his tone calm. "And where are the others?" The boy smiled faintly, but it wasn't José's smile. "Some are asleep. Some are watching. Some are busy with other things." He tilted his head. "But they will all be here soon." Father Miguel made the sign of the cross, quietly praying. He knew the church had rules about documenting such claims carefully before authorizing an exorcism, but they were running out of time. The symptoms were escalating, and the family's fear was becoming something close to despair. For the next half hour, José alternated between silence and strange bursts of speech. Sometimes it was in what sounded like perfect Latin. The priest caught phrases that translated to "we bind," "we hunger," and "he is ours." Other times, it was rapid Portuguese with archaic terms no 13-year-old from a farming village would know. When the candle finally went out, the boy sat up so suddenly that both João and the priest stepped back. His eyes, wide, unblinking, seemed darker than before. "It's too late for your little prayers," he said in a voice that carried a strange echo, as if 2 people were speaking at once. He opened the door himself. "We're just making ourselves at home." Father Miguel's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the small bottle of holy water in his pocket. He had come here tonight intending only to observe and record, but instinct told him to act. He uncapped the bottle and sprinkled 3 drops toward the boy. The reaction was immediate. José's body jerked violently, and a sound tore from his throat. Not quite a scream, not quite a growl, but something that made the hairs on the back of João's neck rise. "You shouldn't have done that," the voice hissed once the sound died away. "Now you've made them angry." The next moment, the boy collapsed back onto the bed, breathing heavily, eyes half-lidded. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. João rushed forward, but Father Miguel held up a hand. "Let him rest, for now." His voice was low, almost defeated. They stepped into the hallway, where the air felt cooler. "Father," João said, his voice breaking, "my boy. He's disappearing. Every day, less of him comes back." Father Miguel didn't answer immediately. His training told him to avoid rushing to conclusions, but his heart told him this was no ordinary illness. If José truly had opened some door, as the voice claimed, then each passing day might be closing their chance to shut it. That night, the priest wrote his longest report yet, carefully detailing the numbered identities José had mentioned, the change in his speech, and the reaction to holy water. He sent a copy to the diocesan office, marking it as urgent. But somewhere, deep in his gut, Father Miguel knew the bureaucracy would be too slow, and by the time the official permission came, José might be gone entirely, not dead, but wholly occupied by whatever had claimed him. The decision was forming in his mind, unspoken but solid. If the church delayed, he would act alone, and the next time, he wouldn't come with just a bottle of holy water. Father Miguel woke before dawn to the sound of the church bell swaying gently in the wind, though no wind touched the small village. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. He had spent most of the night rewriting and rereading his notes on José. Every phrase, Every change in tone, every word in Latin had been documented in careful handwriting. And yet, as he stared at the papers now spread across his desk, he felt a truth pressing down on him. The church will not send help in time. He prayed for guidance, but even as he did, he was already gathering what he would need. A worn, leather-bound ritual book, 2 rosaries, a small wooden crucifix from his own ordination day, a larger silver one that had once belonged to a missionary priest in Angola, 3 white candles, a flask of holy water blessed the night before. When the first light touched the horizon, he was already walking toward the Ferreira farmhouse. João answered the door with the look of a man who had not slept in weeks. His shirt was half-buttoned, and his eyes darted toward the back room before returning to the priest. "He's not himself," João said quietly. "Since you left, he's been talking to the corner again, sometimes laughing, sometimes whispering." "Where is your wife?" Miguel asked. "In the kitchen. She won't go near him anymore." The priest's jaw tightened. "I need the room cleared. You and your wife will stay outside. Do not come in until I say." João hesitated. "Father, is this—" "It's not sanctioned," Miguel cut in, his voice low but firm. "You understand?" The man's lips trembled. He nodded. "Just bring my son back." The bedroom was dim. The single window was shuttered, and the air smelled faintly of smoke from the hearth. José lay flat on the bed, but his eyes were open and fixed on the ceiling. He didn't move as the priest entered. Father Miguel set his items on the small table, lit the 3 candles, and murmured a short prayer under his breath. He placed the silver crucifix at the foot of the bed, facing the boy, and the smaller wooden one around his own neck. The moment the flame steadied, José's head turned slowly toward him. "Finally," the voice said. Father Miguel ignored it and opened the ritual book. He began with the litany of the saints, his voice steady but quiet. By the time he reached the invocation of St. Michael, José's breathing had changed. Slow, deep inhalations followed by rapid exhalations. "You're not strong enough for this," the voice said. "They will crush you before you even scratch the door." Miguel sprinkled holy water across the boy's chest. The reaction was violent. José's back arched, his hands clawed at the sheets, and a guttural sound spilled from his mouth, like a growl dragged across broken glass. The priest pressed on, raising the crucifix high. "I command you, unclean spirit, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, leave this servant of God." The boy's voice cut in, deeper, layered with a second and third tone. "You think he is listening to you?" The candles flickered wildly, though there was no draught. Father Miguel's own heartbeat thundered in his ears, but he didn't slow. He shifted into Latin. "Adjuro te, omnis spiritus immunde." The body on the bed thrashed, twisting in unnatural angles, but the boy's eyes, no longer brown but almost black, never left the crucifix. "Number 9 is watching you," the voice snarled, "and when he's finished there will be nothing left of you either." A sudden crash from the corner startled Miguel. The chair he'd left against the wall had fallen over. His gaze darted to it for an instant, but when he looked back, José was smiling. "You didn't see him, did you?" the boy whispered. "He's closer now." The priest's mouth was dry, but he continued, forcing each Latin word out with precision. Sweat rolled down his temples. José began to laugh, a short, sharp laugh that cut off suddenly, replaced by rapid muttering in Latin. Father Miguel recognized one phrase immediately. "Non relinque. He will not leave him." The priest's hand trembled as he pressed the crucifix to the boy's forehead. The skin beneath it felt feverishly hot, almost burning through the metal. In that moment, the voice shrieked, loud, piercing, inhuman. And then silence. José lay still, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His eyes fluttered shut. Father Miguel lowered the crucifix, his own breath ragged. He didn't believe for a moment that it was over. He believed something had simply gone deeper. The morning after the unsanctioned ritual, the Ferreira farmhouse was unnervingly quiet. Father Miguel sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. the taste of stale coffee clinging to his tongue. The night before had left him hollow, not triumphant, not relieved, only more aware of how far this thing inside José could reach. João hovered near the stove, pretending to fuss with the kettle but watching the priest out of the corner of his eye. "You think it's gone?" João asked. His voice was hoarse, as if he had been whispering all night. "No," Miguel said without looking up. "It's deeper now, hiding." João's hand clenched the kettle handle. "So what happens next?" Miguel didn't answer. Not yet. He had felt something during the ritual, a shift in the air when the boy had laughed, as though the room had been momentarily filled with an audience he could not see. "Number 9, the voice had said. The way it had been spoken was not casual. It had been reverent. By the time Miguel entered José's room again, the boy was sitting up in bed, his knees drawn to his chest, staring at the wall. The shuttered window let in only a narrow stripe of light, enough to catch the dust floating between them. The priest approached slowly, rosary in one hand, crucifix in the other. José's lips moved, but the voice that emerged was not his own. "Number 1, it said plainly, as though introducing itself. The tone was low, male, almost formal. "I was here before the walls were built, before the water ran through the well." Miguel swallowed. "How many are there?" The boy's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "We are the ladder, and you've only touched the first rung." Before Miguel could respond, the voice changed, sharper, female, with a rasp. "Number 2. I wear his bones like a garment. I know what he dreams." José's eyes rolled back briefly, and when they returned they were half-lidded, almost mocking. "Number 3, a different voice said, smooth and deep. "I speak when the others sleep, but we do not sleep often." The shift between voices was seamless, without pause for breath. Miguel began to recite the prayer of deliverance, his Latin steady, but his hands tight around the crucifix. José laughed. This time it was a wet, choking sound. "Number 4, the new voice said, high-pitched, childlike, yet carrying an unnatural coldness. "Do you know what happens when the ladder is climbed? He's waiting at the top." The priest's stomach knotted. He didn't know why, but the mention of he, spoken without name, chilled him more than the voices themselves. The candles flickered again, though there was no draught. Another voice came, slower, almost lazy. "Number 5, I remember the desert. The sand was red." Then, without transition, "Number 6, I want to tear your tongue out before you finish that prayer." Miguel kept going, louder now. "Omnis congregatio demonica." The boy's body jerked hard, his knees slamming against the mattress frame. The voice that emerged next was guttural, so low it barely sounded human. "Number 7, I do not leave, even when the others go." For the first time, Miguel's hands shook visibly. Then, without warning, the boy went utterly still. When his eyes opened, they were different, almost luminous in the candlelight. The voice was calm, deliberate. "Number 8, we are not separate, we are pieces, and when all pieces are gathered," he smiled. "Number 9 speaks." The silence that followed felt oppressive, as though the air itself had thickened. Miguel took a step back, his grip on the crucifix tightening until his knuckles whitened. José's head turned slowly toward the far corner of the room, his gaze fixed on something Miguel could not see. "He's here," the boy whispered in his own voice now, small and frightened. "Father, don't let him—" The sentence cut off as his body seized violently, his head snapping back. When his mouth opened, the sound that came out was neither scream nor word. It was a long, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in Miguel's bones. The priest moved forward, pressing the crucifix to the boy's forehead. "In nomine Jesu Christi, exiabeo." The tone grew louder, reverberating off the walls, until it broke abruptly. José collapsed backward onto the bed, gasping for air. Miguel stood frozen, chest heaving, the rosary beads biting into his palm. Somewhere deep in his mind a terrible understanding formed. They had not yet even met Number 9. The hours after the introduction to the 8 voices passed in a haze of silence and dread. By late afternoon, the Ferreira house felt wrong, not just spiritually heavy, but physically altered. The wooden beams groaned as though under invisible strain, and even the ticking of the old wall clock seemed muted, as if sound itself was being swallowed. Father Miguel had spent most of the day in the kitchen, cross-referencing his worn Latin breviary with a set of exorcism case notes from the diocesan archive. None of the documented possessions he had studied contained a structure like this. 8 voices leading to a 9th. João, seated opposite, kept his eyes on the wood grain of the table. "You think this last one will be worse than the rest?" Miguel hesitated. "The others were fragments. If Nina is the whole, then yes. Much worse." Outside, the sky was cloudless, yet the light through the window seemed dimmer than it should be. By evening, Miguel entered José's room again, armed not with bravado but preparation. Holy water in a small glass bottle, a crucifix, the Rituale Romanum, open to the solemn rite. José lay perfectly still on the bed, his hands folded neatly across his chest, eyes closed. The boy's breathing was slow, almost deliberate. "José," Miguel called softly. The eyelids lifted, revealing pupils blown wide, nearly swallowing the irises. The voice that came was not any of the 8 he had heard before. Father Miguel. It was deep, not guttural or snarling like the others, but resonant, smooth, almost elegant. It spoke his name as if tasting it. "You've met them. My servants." Miguel kept his tone firm. "You are number 9? A faint smile curved the boy's lips. "Names are for the living, but yes, if you must give me one." The room seemed to contract around them, the shadows in the corners deepening. "Why are you here?" Miguel demanded. The smile widened. "You called me." Miguel's jaw tightened. "I have done nothing to invite you." The boy's eyes shimmered faintly in the candlelight. "You broke the circle when you challenged the others. Did you think they were the end? They were the veil. I am what the veil hides." Miguel began to pray aloud, the cadence steady. "Exorcizo te, omnis spiritus immunde." José's body sat upright in one smooth motion, though his hands remained neatly folded. "You think this tongue belongs to you?" the voice asked, almost conversationally. "You think words in your book bind me? You cannot bind what was here before the bindings." The candles sputtered violently, their flames bending sideways as if under a strong wind, but the window was shut tight. João, drawn by the sudden sound, appeared at the doorway. "Father..." Before he could step in, José's head turned sharply toward him. "Ah," number 9 said with a slight tilt of the head. "The helper." João froze. "I know what you hide under the floorboards, João," the voice continued, calm but cutting. "The thing you buried in the winter of '89. You were shaking when you did it. The earth still remembers." João's face drained of color. "He's lying," he muttered, though his voice trembled. Miguel cut in sharply. "Do not listen to him." José's gaze returned to the priest. "Do you think he will still help you once you know what he's done?" Miguel ignored it, sprinkling holy water across the bed. The droplets hissed faintly as they touched the boy's skin. José's smile faltered for the first time. The voice deepened further, each syllable vibrating in the air. "Do you know what I am, priest? I am not one. I am the sum. I am the weight of every oath broken, every child buried in secret, every faith abandoned in silence. I am the end of your sentences." Miguel pressed the crucifix to the boy's forehead. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." The reaction was immediate, not violent thrashing, but a slow, chilling distortion. The boy's skin seemed to tighten over his skull, his lips pulling back just enough to expose his teeth in an unnatural grin. The voice whispered almost kindly, "If you finish that prayer, you will not leave this house alive." Miguel didn't stop. His voice rose over the whisper, driving the words forward. The air grew colder, each breath leaving a plume of mist between them. The bed frame began to vibrate softly, the sound like distant thunder. João clutched the doorframe, torn between running and staying. Miguel poured a stream of holy water over the boy's head. The hiss grew louder, accompanied by a sharp, acrid smell, not sulfur, but something more organic, like burning hair. The boy's eyes snapped wide open. For a moment, Miguel thought he saw not pupils, but a reflection of something vast and moving, as though he were staring into the surface of dark water under moonlight. Number 9 spoke again, but this time the voice layered over itself, multiple tones at once, as if all 8 others were speaking in unison beneath it. "You have touched the ladder, priest. Now climb." The bed jolted an inch off the floor before slamming back down. The vibrations stopped. José slumped forward, unconscious. For a long moment, Miguel didn't move. The house was silent again, the candles steady. João stepped cautiously into the room. "Is it over?" Miguel shook his head slowly. "No. He's showing us the top of the ladder. Next time, we face him fully." He glanced at the boy's still form and felt an unshakable certainty. When number 9 came back, it would not be to speak, it would be to finish. Father Miguel's voice was breaking. Every "in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti" came out hoarse, soaked in the strain of hours without rest. His cassock clung to his back with sweat. A thin streak of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. He'd bitten his cheek during one of the boy's violent lunges. José lay strapped on the narrow bed, but lay was the wrong word. He writhed, convulsed, and arched against the restraints with the strength of something far beyond a malnourished 13-year-old. His wrists were raw where the leather cut into his skin. The air in the room was different now, thicker, almost metallic, as if iron filings floated in it. One of the attending nuns, Sister Beatrice, whispered to another, "He's tiring, but the voice, it hasn't changed." She was wrong. The voice had changed, subtly, but enough for Father Miguel to notice. Over the past weeks, each spirit had come with its own timbre, tone, and rhythm, but this one spoke slowly, deliberately, not snarling, not screaming, almost amused. "He thinks the fight is over," the voice said in accented Portuguese that didn't quite match any region. José's lips barely moved, yet the sound carried unnaturally across the room. "But the clever ones wait, the clever ones survive." Father Miguel kept his crucifix raised, but did not answer. He'd learned not to respond to taunts directly. They fed on conversation, on the illusion of control. Instead, he pressed forward. "Lord Jesus Christ, I call upon your holy name to deliver this child from the snares of the enemy." José's head jerked violently to the left, eyes rolling so far back that only the whites showed. Then, in a slow, unnatural twist, his gaze fixed directly on Sister Beatrice. "Do you still pray for your brother?" the voice asked. "The one you let drown?" Her breath caught. She took a step back, clutching the edge of her habit. "Don't listen, don't listen," she muttered to herself, but her hands trembled. Father Miguel's gut tightened. The entity was probing again, digging into memories it shouldn't know. He accelerated the prayer, each word like a hammer strike. The hours blurred. Time lost its usual order inside that room. The boy's fits came in waves, sudden spasms of inhuman strength, then eerie stillness where his chest barely rose with breath. Each lull felt dangerous, like the pause before a predator pounced. Midway through the night, the temperature plummeted. Their breaths became visible. Candles guttered, though no draught came from the tightly shut windows. Father Miguel signaled for another priest, Father Antonio, to begin the litany of the saints. They spoke in alternating voices, a rhythmic volley of sacred names. José responded with a sound no human throat should make, a low vibration that rattled the water in the glass on the bedside table. Sister Helena, the oldest nun present, knelt by the boy's side. She whispered a psalm in his ear, hoping to reach whatever part of José remained beneath the oppression. For a moment, his expression softened, his body relaxing into the mattress. But then, as if someone had snapped a hidden wire, his body snapped upright, restraints creaking under the sudden force. "She's mine," the voice growled, deep and resonant, yet layered with something childlike beneath it. "They're all mine." The older nun didn't flinch. She pressed a small relic, a fragment of bone encased in glass, against his temple. José screamed, not in pain, but in fury. His voice shifted through 3 different registers in one breath, a young man's, an old man's, and a whispering woman's, before breaking into a guttural laugh. Father Miguel knew what was happening. They were close to forcing this one out. But close didn't mean victory. Close meant the spirit would fight with everything it had left. The crucifix in his hand felt heavier, as if gravity itself had thickened. His lips trembled as he began the exorcism of the possessed in full, Latin echoing in the cramped room. Exorcizo te, omnis immundus spiritus, omnis satanica potestas. José's body shook so violently that one of the bed's legs cracked. Father Antonio pressed down on the boy's shoulders, but it was like restraining a thrashing animal. Then, without warning, José went limp. His head lolled to the side, eyes glassy, lips pale. The room went utterly still. The nuns looked to Father Miguel. Was it over? He hesitated. Years of experience told him. This wasn't release, it was retreat. Keep praying, he ordered. The next moment proved him right. José's eyes rolled forward again, but they weren't his. Pupils dilated to black discs, whites turned the color of ash. He smiled, wide enough that the corners of his mouth split and bled. 28 are gone, the voice said quietly. But I am not them. I am the one who was here before they came. A shiver rippled through the room. The priests exchanged looks. They hadn't spoken the number aloud tonight. You were always here? Father Miguel asked before he could stop himself. The grin widened. The first, the last, the one who waits. The boy began to chant something low and rhythmic. The words were unfamiliar, but the cadence was hypnotic. Sister Helena pressed her palms over her ears. Father Antonio joined Miguel in prayer, but the sound of their voices seemed smaller, almost muffled, as if something in the air swallowed them. Candles went out one by one. Only the crucifix in Father Miguel's hand seemed immune to the dimming, the silver catching what little light remained. The rest of the night became a blur of assault and counter-assault. Sacred water hissed where it touched José's skin. The chanting rose to a shriek, then dropped to a whisper too soft to hear, only to erupt again moments later. But gradually, painfully, the resistance weakened. The boy's body slumped more often between fits. His voice cracked. The layered tones faded to a single rasping growl. By dawn, the oppressive weight in the air had lifted slightly. Not gone, but lighter. Father Miguel collapsed into a chair. His throat burned from hours of prayer. His hands shook as he signed the cross over José's damp forehead. The boy's breathing steadied. His eyes were closed. For the first time in days, he looked like a child again. Sister Beatrice whispered, "Is it finished?" Father Miguel didn't answer right away. He glanced at the crucifix in his hand. Still heavy, still cold. "No," he said finally. "Not yet." Outside, the first light of morning spilled over the horizon. Inside, somewhere deep within the boy's chest, a faint chuckle rose and died away. The chapel was no longer quiet. Every breath inside the small stone room felt amplified, heavier than air should be. The candles burned low, their flames shuddering in unseen draughts. A faint smell of something metallic, almost like rusted water, drifted from the boy's corner. Father Manuel stood at the foot of the cot, his right hand gripping the crucifix so tightly that the edges had pressed red marks into his palm. He had not slept in over 30 hours. None of them had. José lay on his back, eyes closed, but his chest rose and fell in sharp, almost rhythmic bursts. The ropes on his wrists and ankles, thick braided hemp, had been replaced twice since the morning. The last set had frayed under a sudden, violent spasm. From the doorway, Dr. Alvaro scribbled something in his notebook. His face was pale, his jaw set tight, but his pen moved steadily. "What are you writing?" Father Manuel asked without looking up. "Pulse, breathing rate, what I can measure without touching him." the doctor replied quietly. It's irregular, more irregular than yesterday, almost like his heart changes pace on command. Manuel swallowed hard. You think this is still medical? Alvaro hesitated. I think medicine would have failed him by now if it were only illness, but I need to keep observing. If I stop, I become just another witness, and I'm not ready to admit that yet. They both looked toward the boy at the same moment. José's lips parted. His voice, when it came, was not his own. He is coming. The sound was deep, gravelly, and far older than his 13 years. Father Manuel stepped forward. Who is coming? José's eyes opened suddenly, but not wide, not startled. Slowly, methodically, as if whoever was behind them wanted the priest to see the full change. The whites of his eyes were faintly yellowed, and his pupils were too large. You'll know his name soon, the voice said. He walks in the smoke, in the gaps between your prayers. Manuel's throat tightened. Tell me your name. Now. The boy's head tilted, the way a bird tilts to study something on the ground. His lips twisted upward. Which one do you want? I have many. The crucifix in Manuel's hand felt heavier. The last one. The one who refuses to leave. For a moment, there was silence. Even the creak of the wooden beams seemed to fade. Then José smiled, slow and deliberate, before whispering, "The keeper." Alvaro stopped writing. "The keeper?" José turned his head toward the doctor without moving the rest of his body. "Yes, doctor. Keeper of what was promised. Keeper of the ones you think you sent away." Manuel felt a thin bead of sweat slide down his temple. They had expelled entity after entity, names, patterns, even distinct mannerisms, but never had one claimed authority over the others. "You are lying," Manuel said firmly, his voice cracking only slightly. The boy laughed, not loudly, but in short, broken bursts, as if mocking the effort. "Am I? Or do you fear that I'm the only one who has been here since the first scream?" Alvaro moved toward the bed. "Father, maybe we should pause." "No," Manuel said quickly. "If this is the last one, we cannot give it rest." The priest stepped closer, placing the crucifix near José's forehead. "I command you, in the name of Christ, reveal your true purpose here." For the first time that night, José's breathing stopped entirely. It wasn't that it slowed. It stopped. His chest remained still for what felt like an impossible span of seconds. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "To keep him. Always." The candles nearest the cot flickered violently, one snuffing out entirely. Alvaro instinctively moved to relight it, but his match refused to catch. His hands trembled. "The air is damp," he muttered, though both men knew it was not true. Father Manuel began the next prayer, his words tight and deliberate. Latin syllables rolled into the cramped space like stones dropping into water. José did not close his eyes, nor look away from the crucifix. His stare was fixed and cold, as if waiting for the right word to respond to. Halfway through the prayer, the boy spoke again, but this time it was not the deep, gravelly tone. It was a higher, mocking voice. "Why do you call on him? You know he cannot take me." Manuel's voice rose. "The Lord will deliver this child." "Child?" the voice interrupted. "I was here before he was born, before his father's hands touched the soil, before the village had a name." The priest's fingers tightened on the crucifix. José's body shifted, not violently, but in a slow, unnatural arch, as if invisible hands were lifting his spine from beneath. The ropes strained again. Alvaro stepped back toward the door. "Manuel," his heart rate. "I know," Manuel said through clenched teeth. "It will break before I let this thing keep him." The priest leaned closer, nearly touching the crucifix to the boy's skin. "By the blood of Christ, I bind you, keeper." José's mouth opened suddenly, wider than should have been possible, and an ear-splitting sound tore from his throat. Not a scream, but a layered cry, as if multiple voices were overlapping at once, some high, some low, all out of sync. The room seemed to vibrate with it. Alvaro covered his ears. The candles shuddered. Somewhere outside, a dog began barking frantically. Manuel continued praying over the sound, forcing each word out with steady force. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, the sound stopped. José's head fell sideways onto the thin pillow. His eyes fluttered shut. Silence. Álvaro was the first to move. He reached for the boy's wrist, pressing his fingers against the skin. "Pulse is, normal," he whispered. Manuel stepped back slowly. His own breathing was ragged. Normal doesn't mean gone. The candlelight flickered violently, shadows stretching across the rough stone walls like figures frozen mid-scream. Father Matthias's voice was hoarse now, every syllable pushed out through sheer exhaustion. Sweat soaked through his cassock. He had been speaking the prayers for hours, refusing to break the rhythm even when his breath faltered. José lay sprawled on the wooden floor, his wrists and ankles still bound with strips of linen. His breathing came in ragged, uneven gasps. Moments earlier, the air had been filled with the guttural roars of voices that claimed names, each one announcing itself before being driven out. But now, the room was disturbingly quiet. Too quiet. The onlookers, two altar boys, José's mother and the elderly sacristan, stood motionless, afraid to step closer. No one dared to speak, as if words might provoke the silence into answering. Father Matthias lowered his crucifix slowly, eyes fixed on the boy's face. "José," he whispered, "can you hear me?" For a long, unbearable pause, there was no response. Then his head shifted slightly, not with the erratic, violent jerks of before, but with a sluggish, deliberate turn, as though testing the weight of his own body. His eyes opened. The brown irises that had been hidden under a storm of blackened sclera during the worst of the possession seemed to return. He blinked. "My." His voice was hoarse, but it was José's voice. His mother fell to her knees, hands trembling as she reached for him. The tears that ran down her cheeks were almost disbelieving, as if touching him might break the fragile moment. But just as her fingers brushed his face, José flinched violently, sucking in a sharp breath. His entire frame shivered, though not from the cold. The sacristan stepped forward. "Is it over?" Father Matthias didn't answer. He couldn't, because he felt it too, the lingering heaviness in the air like a shadow that refused to move away even when the light was switched on. The exorcism concluded not with triumph, but with an absence. Father Matthias had expelled 29 voices over the course of 3 days. The names were recorded, some in Portuguese, others in languages none of them could identify. O mentiroso, the liar. O assassino, the murderer. A criança, the child. And so on until the last voice, which did not give its name. That final one had left differently, not with a shriek, not with resistance, but with something closer to withdrawal, almost as if it had chosen to leave. In the weeks that followed, José appeared physically improved. The violent seizures stopped. He slept through the night for the first time in months. He even began eating again, though only in small portions. Still, those close to him noticed changes that didn't fit into the relief of his recovery. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. He avoided mirrors. He no longer played with the other boys in the village square. When they called for him, he would stand at a distance, expression unreadable, and eventually turn away. The local physician who had examined him after the exorcism attributed it to post-traumatic behavior, the natural psychological reaction of a boy who had endured months of distress. But Father Matthias wasn't so sure. One late evening, about 2 months after the exorcism, Matthias visited the family's home. Jose's mother welcomed him in with the same quiet gratitude she had shown since the ordeal, but when Matthias asked to see the boy, her smile faltered. "He's in his room," she said softly. "But father, he's different at night." Matthias raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She hesitated, as though unsure if the words would sound foolish once spoken. "Sometimes I hear him whispering, not to me, not to anyone I can see. And when I go in, he stops. But he doesn't look at me. He looks at the corner of the room, as if someone is there." When Matthias stepped into the small bedroom, Jose was seated cross-legged on the floor facing the far corner. His back was to the door. The priest cleared his throat. "Jose?" The boy didn't turn. Matthias moved closer, the wooden floorboards creaking under his weight. When he was only a few feet away, Jose finally spoke. "They're gone," he said, voice calm. "Yes," Matthias replied cautiously. "You are free now." Jose shook his head slowly. "Not all." Matthias felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. "What do you mean?" The boy turned his head just enough for Matthias to see his eye. It was normal, brown, clear, but the expression behind it was unnerving. "He stayed," Jose said simply. "The quiet one." From that night onward, Matthias began visiting more regularly. He brought holy water. He prayed with Jose. But he never pressed the boy to explain further. Not yet. Pressing too hard might risk pulling something to the surface. Still, he could not ignore the details. Sometimes during prayer, Jose's lips would move slightly out of sync with the words. Once, during the Lord's Prayer, Matthias noticed the boy murmuring an extra line, one that didn't belong. Other times, Jose would glance to empty spaces in the room, holding that gaze too long. It was never violent, never loud, but it was enough to keep Matthias awake at night. By the following year, the case was officially closed in church records. The archdiocese considered it a successful exorcism. The 29 spirits had been named, confronted, and expelled. But in Matthias's personal journal, there was one final entry that no one else saw. He is not possessed in the way he was before. The boy eats, sleeps, and functions. But there is a presence, not hostile, not benevolent, watching, patient, as if it has found a permanent place, not inside his body, but somewhere near him. I fear it is not waiting for him to weaken. I fear it is simply waiting. Years later, when Jose was nearly grown, people in the village still spoke about him in low voices. They said he could predict storms before they came, that he sometimes called people by names no one else knew, names from their childhood, or the names of the dead. When someone asked him how he knew, he would smile faintly and say, "A friend told me." No one asked who. Father Matthias died in his sleep at the age of 62. Among his few personal belongings, the sacristan found his worn black notebook. Most of it was filled with standard parish records and prayers, but between two blank pages, there was a single folded sheet of paper. On it were the names of the 29 expelled spirits, and beneath them, written in a different ink, one final name. O Silencioso, the silent one. No one could ever prove whether the final presence was truly there, or whether it was the lingering fear of a boy traumatized by something he could never fully explain. But in the village, where stories outlive those who lived them, they still speak about Jose Ferreira dos Santos, not as the boy who was possessed, not as the boy who survived, but as the boy who still, on certain moonless nights, is seen standing at the edge of the forest, listening. What happened in that small weathered house remains one of the most disturbing accounts ever recorded. 29 spirits were named, 29 voices silenced, and yet some say one of them never truly left. The case was closed, but the questions were not. If possession could grip a boy in the middle of a quiet village, what's to say it couldn't happen again? What's to say it hasn't already? This was the boy who fought 29 spirits and survived. But survival doesn't always mean freedom.